Family hired PI to prove my company was fake. He proved their $340,000 fraud was real. The Sunday my family tried to end me, I sat outside their house for 11 minutes before I went in. Not because I was afraid. I had moved past afraid a long time ago, somewhere around the second year of building a company that no one in my family believed existed, and the third year of sitting at their dinner table nodding at questions designed to confirm I was failing. Fear had metabolized into something quieter and more durable. Something that looked from the outside exactly like calm. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway in Detroit with the engine off and the November cold pushing in at the edges of the windows, and I thought about a man named Earl Hutchinson. Earl Hutchinson had been my operations professor at Wayne State. He was 62, semi-retired, and had spent 20 years building and selling 3 logistics companies before he walked into a classroom and decided that teaching was the last good thing he had left to do. He was the kind of man who spoke in complete sentences and meant all of them. No performance, no filler, just the clean transmission of what he actually thought. He had pulled me aside after the 3rd class of my junior year and said without preamble, "You're watching the room instead of participating in it. That's a skill. Most people never develop it. Don't let anyone convince you it's a weakness." I had been 20 years old. No one had ever described anything about me as a skill before. Earl became my mentor. And 11 years later, when I sat in my car outside my parents' house with a private investigator already inside and a family arranged like a tribunal around the dining room table, it was Earl's voice I heard most clearly. "You're watching the room. That's a skill." I got out of the car. I went inside. My name is Jerome Calloway. I am 31 years old. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Meridian Freight Solutions, a logistics technology company headquartered in Detroit, Michigan, currently valued at $112 million. We build routing optimization systems for mid to large freight carriers, and we hold 4 active federal contracts, 2 with the Department of Transportation and 2 with the Department of Defense's Logistics Supply Chain Office. We have 63 employees. Last year we were named one of Crain's Detroit Business's 50 companies to watch. The year before that, I was in the room when the Secretary of Transportation referenced our platform by name in a congressional infrastructure briefing. My family believed I drove a truck for a living. That was not an accident, and it was not vanity, and it was not cruelty. It was the only way I had found to protect what I was building from the people most likely, without meaning to destroy it. To understand my family, you have to understand my Aunt Vivian. Vivian Calloway Marsh was my father's older sister, and she had occupied the position of family authority for as long as I had been alive. She was 61, sharp, financially successful in her own right. She and her husband John ran a property management company in the Detroit metro area, and she had the specific confidence of a woman who had been right often enough that she had stopped distinguishing between the moments she was right and the moments she simply believed she was. He was not a bad person. I want to be honest about that because the easiest version of this story makes her a villain, and she was something more complicated than a villain. She was a woman who had watched her family struggle financially for decades, who had positioned herself as the one who had figured things out, and who therefore had a profound structural investment in the idea that success came through the channels she recognized: established businesses, visible assets, conventional markers. When I appeared to have none of those things, her interpretation was not malice. It was pattern recognition applied without enough information. She had decided sometime around my 27th birthday that I was a liar. Not a harmless one. A specific, calculated one. Someone who fabricated a company to avoid the shame of having nothing to show for his education. She had mentioned this to my mother first, then my father, then my sister Diane, and by the time the idea had circulated through the family long enough, it had the weight of consensus. Jerome says he runs a freight company. Jerome can never explain exactly what it does. Jerome doesn't have an office we've seen, a business card any of us have held, a single verifiable proof. The fact that I had offered none of these things was, to Vivian, evidence of fabrication rather than of privacy. It did not occur to her, or if it did, she dismissed it, that I might have reasons for the silence that had nothing to do with deception. My father was quieter about it. Marcus Calloway was a retired auto worker, a man of deep dignity and few words, who loved his son and did not know how to say so, and therefore sometimes expressed that love is worry, and sometimes expressed that worry is skepticism, and sometimes expressed that skepticism as silence at the dinner table when Vivian made her observations and he did not push back. My mother, Sandra, was caught between. She knew Vivian could be wrong. She also needed, at some fundamental level, to believe the family authority figure. It was easier, and family is always partly about choosing what is easier. So she nodded when Vivian spoke and looked at me with those complicated eyes that said I love you and I don't know what to believe, and I had learned to hold that without letting it undo me. My sister Diane was 28 and had simply absorbed the narrative. She wasn't cruel to me directly. She was the kind of person who goes quiet around conflict and then mirrors the most powerful person in the room afterward. Around Vivian, she mirrored skepticism. It was not personal. It was just who Diane was, and I had made a kind of peace with it, even though that peace still had edges. What none of them knew, what none of them had ever known, was why I had gone quiet in the first place. The silence had started at 22, 6 months out of Wayne State, when I pitched my first version of what would become Meridian to my family at Easter dinner. I was young and excited and had not yet learned the specific acoustics of this family, the way enthusiasm was received as naivety, the way ambition without credentials was treated as delusion. Vivian had listened to my pitch for 4 minutes and then said, calmly and with complete authority, Jerome, logistics software is a saturated market controlled by companies worth billions. You have no capital, no contacts, and no experience. I'm not saying this to be unkind. I'm saying it so you don't waste the next 3 years of your life. My father had said nothing. My mother had said, she might have a point, baby. I had nodded. I had helped clear the dishes. I had driven home and sat in my apartment and looked at the business plan I had spent 4 months building with Earl Hutchinson's guidance, and I had made a decision. I would build it. I would build it completely, carefully, without asking any of them for anything. Not money, not support, not approval. And I would not tell them when it was going well any more than I told them when it was hard. Earl had seeded me with the first $50,000 in startup capital, a loan at 0 interest that I repaid in full 18 months later. He had introduced me to his contact at a regional freight carrier in Ohio, which became my first real client. He had flown to Washington with me when I met with the DOT contract office for the first time, and he had sat in the hallway while I took the meeting, and afterward he had bought me a terrible airport sandwich and said, "You knew every answer before they asked the question. That's not luck. That's years." He was the only person outside my company who knew the full picture. My VP of Business Development was a woman named Kezia Osei, former supply chain consultant, meticulous, funny in the dry way of someone who has worked in federal contracting long enough to find the absurdity necessary for survival. She had joined Meridian in year 2 when the company was 7 people and a server rack in a converted warehouse, and she had stayed through every difficult quarter and every contract negotiation and every 2 a.m. delivery crisis because she believed in the platform and because she told me once she had never worked for someone who listened as carefully as I did. Kezia knew about my family in the abstract, knew I kept my professional and personal lives separate, knew there were reasons. She did not know the specific shape of the reasons until much later. I had a group of close friends from Wayne State, 4 of us who still met monthly for dinner, who knew me outside the context of either family or work, who had watched me build Meridian from the outside without knowing the numbers and had cheered for me anyway because they knew my character and trusted it. My closest friend in the group, a structural engineer named Darius, had said to me once, "One day your family is going to find out and the look on your aunt's face is going to be worth 12 years of patience." I had laughed and said I wasn't waiting for that. I was building for other reasons. That was true. But I would be dishonest if I said there was nothing in me that had been waiting very quietly for the room to finally have the right information. The Sunday dinner invitation had come from my mother, which was normal. What was not normal was the specific phrasing. "Everyone will be here. Your aunt thinks it's important you come." Vivian did not request my presence at family dinners. He tolerated it. The fact that she had specifically asked my mother to ensure I attended was the first signal. I had called Earl on the drive up from Detroit. Not to strategize, I didn't know what was coming, but because talking to Earl had always been the way I recalibrated. He was 73 now, slower in his body but completely undiminished in his mind, and he had listened to my summary of the invitation and said, "Sounds like someone's made a move. Stay in your feet. Don't explain yourself before you know what you're explaining yourself to." "I know," I said. "I know you know," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." So I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I watched the house through the windshield, the lights on in the dining room, the shadows moving behind the curtains. And then I went in. The dining room was arranged the way I had known it would be. My parents at either end of the long table. Vivian and her husband John on the left side. Diane next to them. A place set for me on the right alone. And at the far end of the room near the credenza, a man I had never seen before. Mid-60s, a dark blazer, a leather portfolio on the credenza beside him, the particular bearing of someone accustomed to professional settings and not remotely uncomfortable in this one. I hung up my coat. I sat down. I poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. "Good you're here," Vivian said. She placed a business card on the table between us and slid it toward me. She did it deliberately, the way you set down evidence. "We're not doing this anymore." I looked at the card. Walter Grimes. Grimes Investigative Services. Below his name, former Special Agent, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. 28 years federal service. "We hired him 60 days ago," Vivian continued. Her voice was composed and certain, the voice of a woman who had planned this moment. "Your lies end tonight." My mother nodded. My father was looking at the table. Diane was looking at Vivian. I set the business card down. I picked up my water glass. I took a drink. Walter Grimes cleared his throat. He picked up his portfolio from the credenza. He was unhurried. The specific unhurriedness of someone who has done difficult things many times and found that speed rarely improves them. "My name is Walter Grimes," he said. 28 years with the FBI, the last 14 in financial crimes. I was retained 60 days ago to conduct a comprehensive background and financial investigation on the named subject. He looked at me briefly, not unkindly. "Standard for my practice. Any investigation of this nature covers the named subject and all financially connected parties. That is not a choice. It is professional protocol, and the clients were informed of this at the time of engagement." Vivian nodded. He was still confident. She had paid for this. She believed she knew what was in the portfolio. "I'll present the first report," Grimes said. He opened the portfolio. Named subject, Jerome Marcus Calloway. Age 31. Founder and majority shareholder, 71%, of Meridian Freight Solutions LLC, incorporated in the state of Michigan. Current independent valuation, $112 million. He laid a document on the table. Then a second. 4 active federal contracts. 2 with the Department of Transportation. 2 with the Department of Defense Logistics Supply Chain Office. Combined contract value, $47 million over 5 years. He placed a third document. No outstanding legal judgments. No debt defaults. No liens. No criminal record. He closed the first section of his portfolio. The dining room had gone very quiet. I watched my father. He was staring at the documents on the table with an expression I could not immediately categorize. Not shock exactly, but something being rapidly rearranged behind his eyes, some foundational assumption being quietly revised. Vivian had not moved. She was looking at the documents. Her face had the particular stillness of someone who has been very certain and has just felt the ground move. "Second report," Grimes said. He reached for the next section of his portfolio. He looked directly at Vivian and his voice stayed even. "Connected parties." The investigation, as per standard protocol, covered all parties financially connected to the subject's background and family network. He paused. "I have findings regarding a property management business registered in Wayne County under the names Vivian Calloway Marsh and John Elliott Marsh." Uncle John shifted in his chair. It was a small movement. Almost nothing. But I noticed it the way I noticed everything in rooms I was watching carefully. "Shall I read this aloud?" Grimes said quietly. "Or would you prefer I provide the documentation privately?" Vivian's mouth opened. "I would suggest," Grimes continued before she spoke, "that your answer be informed by the fact that federal investigators operate under mandatory disclosure requirements when evidence of financial crimes is presented in a formal investigative context." He held her gaze. "This is a formal investigative context." John stood up. He stood up so fast his chair scraped back across the hardwood floor, and the sound of it cut through the silence like something breaking. "John," Vivian said. Her voice had changed completely. "Viv. Sit down. I have to." Vivian started screaming. Not the dramatic scream of a performance. The scream of someone watching something they built collapse in real time, watching a private catastrophe become a public one, watching the control they have exercised over a room for decades evaporate in the specific way it evaporates when the truth arrives with documentation. My father said, "Vivian." She stopped. She sat down. She looked at Walter Grimes with an expression that was equal parts fury and terror, and Grimes looked back at her with the expression of a man who had decided, a long time ago, that his job was to find things out and that whatever people felt about being found out was separate from his professional obligation. He set the second report on the table. $340,000, he said. Diverted from 3 separate commercial property escrow accounts over a period of 26 months. The transaction pattern is consistent with deliberate fund misappropriation rather than accounting error. He looked at my parents. "I'm sorry to deliver this in this context. It was not the context I would have chosen." My father picked up the second report. He read the first page. He set it back down. He folded his hands on the table, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen before. A man absorbing in a single evening that his son had built a $100 million company in silence and his sister had stolen $300,000 from client accounts, and that these two facts had arrived in the same room at the same time because his sister's certainty had overreached itself. He looked at me. I looked back at him. "Jerome," he said. Just my name. Nothing attached to it. But the way he said it, with something that was grief and something that was pride and something that was an apology he did not yet have the words for, landed in my chest like a weight I had not known I was carrying until someone acknowledged it was there. "I know, Dad," I said. Walter Grimes left 30 minutes later. He had given my parents his card, informed them that the second report would be filed with the relevant oversight bodies within 72 hours as per his legal obligation, and recommended that Vivian and John retain legal counsel before the end of the weekend. He had done all of this with the same professional evenness he had maintained throughout, and when he shook my hand on the way out he said simply, "Solid company." I read the DOT contract summaries. "Good work." Thanked him. I meant it. What happened in the house after he left was not clean, and it was not something I will describe in full, because some of it was private in the way family pain is private even when it is deserved. Vivian and John left without eating. John had not spoken since he stood up from his chair. Vivian had spoken too much, explanations, justifications, a version of events that reorganized the facts around her intentions rather than her actions. And my father had listened to all of it and said almost nothing, and the silence he maintained was more damning than any argument he could have made. Diane stayed at the table after they left. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know you actually had a company." "I know," I said. "I mean, I knew you said you did. But I thought." "I know what you thought." She was quiet again. "I'm sorry," she said. It was genuine. Incomplete but genuine. "I appreciate that," I said. I meant it. I also knew that sorry was the beginning of something, not the end of it, and that what came next would determine what my relationship with my sister actually was. I was willing to find out. That felt like enough for one evening. My mother cried in the kitchen while she cleared the dishes that had not been eaten from. I helped her. We worked side by side without talking, and when the table was cleared she put her hand briefly on my arm and said, "I should have pushed back more." "Yes," I said. Not cruelly. Just honestly. She nodded. He had known it too. She had simply not done it, and the gap between knowing and doing is where most of the damage in families lives. I drove back to Detroit that night. I did not stay over. I needed the 4 hours alone in the car. The dark highway, the radio low, the specific solitude of motion that is neither here nor there. I called Earl from somewhere outside Flint. "How'd it go?" he said. I told him. All of it in order. He listened without interrupting, which was one of his great gifts. When I finished he was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. Like something ended that I didn't realize I'd been waiting to end. And like I don't quite know what's on the other side of that. "That's right," he said. "That's exactly right. You're not supposed to know yet. Vivian and John are going to face serious legal exposure." "Yes." My dad looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Yes. That should feel better than it does." Earl was quiet for a moment. "Jerome, being seen is not the same as being known. Your father saw you tonight. Knowing you is going to take longer and require more from both of you. Don't confuse the beginning of a thing for the whole thing." I drove the rest of the way in silence. The legal situation moved quickly. Vivian and John retained attorneys by Monday morning. By Wednesday, Wayne County had opened a formal inquiry into the escrow fund diversions. By the following month, federal jurisdiction had been established given the interstate nature of several of the affected accounts. The investigation that Vivian had commissioned to expose my company had become the precise mechanism of her legal exposure. Not because I had engineered it, but because Walter Grimes had simply done his job completely, the way he had told her from the beginning he would. There is something almost geometric about that. She had paid for the instrument. She had provided it with access. She had summoned me to the room where it would speak. She had done everything except anticipate that it would speak in both directions. The company had a strong Q4. Kezia had closed a new contract with a regional freight carrier in the Southeast, our seventh active commercial client. The DoD contract office had indicated early interest in a contract extension. At our December all-hands meeting, I looked around the room at 63 people who had built something real alongside me, and I felt the weight of it. Not the pride which was there but the weight which was heavier and more honest. Darius and the Wayne State Group came to Detroit for New Year's. We went to a restaurant on the riverfront, the kind with high ceilings and good wine and the city visible through tall windows. Late in the evening, after I had told them the Thanksgiving story, Darius leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "You know what gets me?" he said. "She spent money to find out the truth. She just didn't know the truth had more than one face." "Nobody ever does," I said. "That's why they're always surprised." Earl came to Detroit in January for what he called a consultation. He still liked to be useful and I still liked to be guided, and we had developed over 11 years a rhythm of meeting in which neither of us admitted that what we were really doing was making sure the other one was all right. We had lunch at a diner near the Meridian offices. He ordered the same thing he always ordered, black coffee, eggs scrambled, wheat toast. He looked at me across the table with the particular attention he had given me since I was 20 years old. "What are you building next?" he said. It was his highest compliment. Not well done, not you made it. Just the forward pull. The assumption that the work continued. "Expanding the DoD relationship," I said. "And Kezia has been developing a proposal for a rail freight optimization pilot that could be significant." He nodded. "And personally?" I thought about my father who had called me twice since November. Once to talk about nothing in particular and once to ask if I would come to Christmas, just the immediate family, quiet. I had gone. It had been careful and a little formal and occasionally almost warm, and I had driven home thinking, this is what repair looks like when it's honest. It doesn't look like before. It looks like after. "Working on it," I said. "Slowly." "Slowly is fine," Earl said. "Slowly means it's real. I'm not going to tell you that what happened in that dining room fixed anything. It didn't fix my family. It didn't give me back the years of Sunday dinners where I sat in silence and watched my aunt's certainty occupy the room. It didn't return whatever version of closeness with my father might have existed if he had pushed back when it mattered. Those things are gone, and the particular texture of their absence is something I carry with me quietly, the way you carry things that have become part of your weight. What it did was simpler. It made the truth visible in a room full of people who had chosen for years to see something else. And it did that not because I demanded it, not because I performed it, not because I orchestrated a confrontation, but because a former FBI agent did his job completely and professionally and without selecting which truths were convenient. I had built something real. The building had not required their belief. But it had required me, every day, to work without the acknowledgement that most people consider necessary. To carry the full weight of it alone, with only Earl and Kezia and a handful of people who knew the real shape of what I was doing. If you've been carrying something like that, something you built in the quiet, something the people around you decided wasn't real without ever asking to see it, I want you to know that the building is the proof. Not the room finding out. The building. The room finding out is just the moment when the truth finally catches up to the work. For me, it arrived in 2 envelopes on a Sunday in November in a dining room in Detroit, carried by a man who simply would not deliver half a truth. That was enough. It was more than enough. And the next morning I was back at my desk.